Well, Dave, it is a pleasure to sit down with you on this beautiful. I am in Ohio, and it is 75 degrees in March.
That's great, man. It's 50 in New York, which is good. That's good. We're
50.
happy.
That's in March. We'll take it. We'll take
We will definitely take it.
snow's not flying. Thank God.
That's
Spring
good.
has sprung. Hopefully, it's not the fall spring they talk about. Hopefully, it's something good.
Hoping it stays forever. Yeah, we're good. And the daylight savings time, we're happy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm glad that we're doing this because I've gotten to know you over the last several months, and I've just been very encouraged. And you've become one of my favorite people that I've met, and just love hearing your story and the passion that God has given you, and the wisdom that He's and I'm encouraging you to share that He's poured into your life, which I'm thankful for. So I want to take us back to the beginning, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Just share with us, your story on what God's done in your life and how you met the Lord, and we'll start there, and we'll just kind of weave our way to where we are today and see what God does.
All right. Well, I grew up in the church. Church was a part of my family life. We did everything at church. We went to church, went to Sunday school, went to basketball, did plays, youth group. It was almost a daily experience.
Hmm.
But as I got older, um, got into high school, left the church. Kind of it was the 60s. Kind of got myself in some trouble. Walked away from the Lord. Went to a spring break in Clearwater, Florida, on the beach. I was down there. We had down there to get high and just hang out. There were some people from Michigan that were sharing the gospel. And in the midst of this chaotic experience I was having with all my friends, God said enough. It was just like in my head. I went back to look for them. They were gone. But I went back to the house where I was. I nursed one beer so that people wouldn't give me a hard time, but something had changed. Came back. Some of my friends were already attending a small Italian Assemblies of God church, of all things, Christian church in North America. I started attending church, and God began to work on my life. And it was there. It was a small church, but the pastor would give people opportunities to develop in their ministry. And so
Hmm.
my friends were starting to preach, and I was sitting there, and nothing was happening. And my prayer was, God, either take away the desire to preach or give me an opportunity. And a week later, the pastor came up to me and said, "We're going to have a midweek service. Would you want to preach?" So that was kind of the call to ministry.
Okay.
Stayed there. God kind of developed me, and then had some theological differences with the church. I had been reading a lot of stuff in church history, and I ended up leaving there, going to a congregational church, and it was there that they were just going to a spurt of growth. The pastor had gotten there. There was 13 people in the church. He had went around. The church was starting to go to grow. I came in with a couple of my friends and our wives and families, and the church got up to about 75 people. But I was saved 6 years at that point, and I was one of the mature Christians in the church.
Mm.
So kind of moved into leadership, and then uh, eventually the pastor left, and they called me to be the pastor of the church. I
Hmm.
hadn't gone to seminary yet, so they sent me to seminary. So I was going to seminary and pastoring in my first church. Um, Took me 6 years to do a 3 year uh, curriculum, but I was in ministry at the same time, so actually it was a good experience to do it that way.
Right.
And then it would then I stayed there for 27 years. But it was an interesting time because it was the late 70s, early 80s. The boat people were coming out of South Vietnam and Cambodia. And our little church of 100 people sponsored 250 refugees in 3 or 4 years.
Wow.
It started with we were going to sponsor one family with the local Methodist church. And we went to a congregational meeting, and one of the members of the church read Matthew 25 and said, "Is it enough to do one family with another church?"
Hmm.
So my wife and I ended up taking the first a young a brother and a sister.
Hmm.
We sponsored them, and then the church people just began sponsoring and taking people into their home. So we began this whole journey, my wife and I, of bringing people into our home and ministering to them. We ended up buying a 8 bed. It was like 6 or 8 bedroom house in Far Rockaway, huge old house.
Hmm.
We had at one point 27 people living in the house with us, and just kind of going through this really crazy time.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, we didn't know what we were doing, but we had energy. We were
Yeah,
energetic. So
sometimes that's all it takes, right?
yeah.
Sometimes we got to have the motivation to keep going forward to what we know.
So we had all these. We had 3 or 4 families with big houses that were taking all these refugees in,
Wow,
and then they would sleep. Some were sleeping in the church building, and it was kind of interesting time.
that's amazing.
But yeah.
So let me take you back a little bit to when you got born again. Or when you heard the gospel, I guess again on that day. Uh, did you know kind of immediately that God had His hand on your life, that ministry was something that you were called to do? Or did you
I
have
don't
other?
know I don't know if that day, but
Yeah.
shortly after that, right when I started going back to church, I started to sense that a call of God
Mm,
in my life,
wow.
right? And it was I really prayed God either take it away or give me
Yeah.
opportunity, because I was young. I was just married. I think I had my first son by that point, and no, I don't. No, we didn't have any children yet. But I was like, I've got to decide what I'm going to do with my life. Am I
Mm,
going to get a job? I was a sign painter at that point.
mhm.
I had some opportunities to advance in that career, and I had to decide if I'm going that way or the other way. Am I going to go into church work, or am I going to go into developing my sign career? Uh,
Yeah.
so it was a time of real decision making.
Hmm. And being in that moment's a step of faith too, right? Especially as a newly married man, and you got a family to take care of, and there's a lot to consider, right? For people when they feel that call, but they feel that not fear, but they feel that pressure too. Like, oh my goodness, am I doing this? Am I really
Right,
doing?
like, I'm gonna pay for this, right? I live in New York, right?
Yeah.
Nothing's cheap in New York.
No.
So
Wow.
it's like, yeah, and I had some real opportunities. Uh, I was working with one of the um, sisters in the church. Her father was a graphic artist, and so I was working with him. He was giving me some side jobs.
Yeah.
We cleaned some paintings in a Catholic church in Manhattan.
Oh, that's
We were doing all kinds of crazy stuff, and he had opportunity for me to make some real money and go in that direction.
hmm.
And I turned it down
Wow.
to go
That's
this
a
way.
step of faith. So fast forward a little bit. So you start that ministry, you got the all the refugees, and then what's the next step? What was the?
Well, next step was the church went to. Actually, I was not. I was the assistant pastor at that point. The
Okay.
next step, the church went through a bad split. Right, there
Mm,
was some. It was just like some. It was a bad time, but it was at that time where they called me to be the pastor. So then it was pulling the church together. We were on the borderline. We're just outside of New York City in Nassau County, and I was living in Queens on the other side. Just
mhm.
it was blocks away, but it was 2 different places. And
Yeah.
God was really challenging me to deal with some of the social issues that were going on, and so kind of getting involved in some community organizing at the same time, kind of building the church up, raising my family. We were all kind of
Mm,
young families. So it was an interesting time to kind of figure out what was going on.
yeah.
The neighborhood was changing, and so there was lots of different things that I was wrestling with and trying to figure out how do we go forward. Where's our focus? Is the Nassau County side was a primarily Jewish community, upper middle class. The Queen side was a poor Black minority community with totally different issues going on.
Hmm.
Um, but my best friend at that time had a big house like I had in Far Rockaway, so we were dealing with we went from refugees to street people to battered women, all kinds of interesting people were coming by.
Yep.
And we walked around and we were looking for resources. We went to the public officials, and as we went around asking questions, everything came back to us. so it was kind of a strange, wild, crazy time of ministry, and kind of seeing God do some amazing things.
Yeah, it's the boots on the ground. You were right in the thick of the hurting and the lost and the hurting. I mean, that's what we've been called to reach, and you were inundated by it.
That's been the call of my life. I mean, I've never had a big church, but it always was drawn to those kind of people in real needs, people who were struggling, and just kind of hung around in that environment.
Yeah, I think that's a misconception for a lot of people that go into ministry. They think if God calls me to be a pastor or a minister, then I'm going to have this platform and I'm going to have a large number of people sitting in front of me where I'm preaching every week, and that number is going to grow and grow and grow, and then I'm going to get a TV deal. And there's this weird pathway to success that we've created in Christianity, which really it's just being effective to the call of and obedient to the call of God on your life, and being where you are and reaching to those around you. And that's what is effective ministry, not this pseudo celebrity mentality, I guess is the
well, yeah. I mean, we're called to that because that's who we are as Americans, right? That success story thing. But I remember hearing one megachurch pastor at one point saying, he built this huge church, but it was a mile wide and an inch deep, because you're always preaching the evangelistic message, and the church grows, but you never kind of dealing with the depth of ministry. And the things that I read, like really after about 150 people, that's what one person can handle. So at that point, you've got to decide, do I get another pastor? What do I do?
Sure.
Do I start another church? Right?
Yeah.
Do we send people out? I mean, those are kind of the questions that people have to ask themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we do get caught up in the success story, right? I want to be the successful pastor.
Right. Yeah. And success is really just being obedient to what God's telling you to do.
Yes, and he takes care of you, right?
Yeah.
He does take care of you. That you find out over years, So at one point I had, after being 27 years in Community Bible Church, I was really felt God wanted me to move on, right? So my wife was working for Lutheran Social Services, and I had grown up in the Lutheran church. And so her boss said, I know your husband's looking. He grew up in the Lutheran church. He should talk to the bishops, the president, see what happens. So I met with the bishop at the time, and he said, where do you want to be? And I said, well, I'd like to be in Manhattan. He said, I can put you there tomorrow. So God opened up that door. And that was another interesting. We were in Midtown Manhattan. There was a lot of, we were down the block from Carnegie Hall and Lincoln Center, all that stuff. So we ended up doing a coffee house ministry of bringing in Christian artists who weren't necessarily playing worship music, but were Christians trying to further their career.
Yeah.
So we did that for a long time. I had a friend who's been in a radio ministry for like 50 years. And he was hooking us up with different, it was called the ministry was called The Stoop. And he was getting us lined up with all these Christian artists around the city to kind of play at the church. And then things got really weird. This guy walked in. I used to leave the door of the church open. So this guy, Rudy, comes in, and because the door's open, most people lock the door. I kept the doors open. He comes in and said, "No." He come in a couple of times, and then he said, and this is an old church built in the 1880s or something, right? It's a church, but there was no pews. They had taken the pews out. We were using these really comfortable chairs that were in place, but everything was movable. And he's like, I run a gym, right? He goes, a trampoline kind of thing. He goes, and a possibility. So not thinking, I said, sure. So all of a sudden, him and his friend come in with these mats and a gym and a trampoline and all this stuff. And so for a couple of years, we were running once a week. We were running a gym for the children in the neighborhood,
Wow.
bouncing on trampolines in the church. So that was kind of strange.
Wow, it's a multi-purpose facility at that point. Which is
yes, exactly. It's like this is the place where my experience as a child was the church was a place where you went to for everything,
yeah, yeah,
And so it's gotten to the place now where church is what you do on Sunday morning or, meetings, but it's not a place where you live your life, where there's community.
yeah.
So I always see that as like an important part of what the church is supposed to be. That this is where we go because this is our family. This is our community center. This is where we go.
Yeah, and like you said, it's not just a once a week event because that's good and that's encouraging during that time. But we need each other on a Tuesday afternoon at 4 o'clock. You know what I mean? Life is happening to us all the time, and God's put us around the people that He's put us around for a reason, I believe, to pour into each other and help each other along the way.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's not necessarily always a spiritual event, right?
No,
it could be a meal. It could be a game. It could be coffee together, anything.
Yeah.
It's just that my argument is that if you want to study bees, you study beehives. If you want to study people, you study towns, villages, and cities, because that's where we live. We're social beings.
Yeah.
Right? Now, we're fearful. Sin causes us to lock our doors and to withdraw, and the world pulls us from each other. But there's something within our nature, in the image of God, that causes us to need to be together.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a reason 8 million people live in New York City, because we have to. Right. We need to. We might hate, but we need to be around other people.
Yeah.
And so even when we leave, we go to places like Arkansas and we live in housing developments that kind of look like Queens, but you're closer to the country. So I get that, but we need to live together. That social network is important to us.
We need community. And I think one of the worst things that somebody can do is to isolate themselves from the body and to try to do life on their own. I don't need anybody. I can figure it out. That's not what God created. That wasn't the plan. It's not good for man to be alone, and that's just more than marriage. That's just in general. It's not good for us to try to do things on our own.
Absolutely, and we live in a lonely time, right? And I think that the enemy uses the societal comforts to draw us away from ourselves. So when COVID came and everybody stayed home, they said, "Oh, this is wonderful." Right. So now I want to work at home. I want to shop at home. I want to eat at home. So I call the restaurant and Seamless sends me my dinner. Then Amazon brings me everything I need. And I work out of my home and it's convenient, but it's lonely. And we don't want to do community is costly. I've got to get up and go outside. I've got to, I think it was Kurt Vonnegut said, he told his wife, he said, I'm going to buy an envelope. She goes, you can buy hundreds of envelopes online. He said, yeah, but when I go outside, I see the fire trucks go by and I wave to them. I see people walking their dogs and I get to talk to them. He said, I see different people and I dance. He said, what computers stop us from dancing? We need to get out in the street and dance again. And I think he's right. We need to get out in the street and meet one another.
Yes.
Not for deep conversations necessarily, but for social interaction that just makes life better, right?
Yeah,
a smiley face makes life better. A hello when walking to the store.
Absolutely. That's, to me, that's real life. And I feel like, because I grew up in church, and I was at church every time the doors were open because mom and dad were the pastor. So I was there cleaning the bathrooms. I was there, cleaning up before the services, passing out the bulletins, waiting for everybody to leave, being the last ones to lock the door, all that kind of stuff. We were there for prayer meeting, for choir practice, for Wednesday night study, all the things. But I realized there was such a need for community. And then I always thought about people that didn't come to church. Like, where did they get their community and their social interaction? And a lot of people try to find that stuff at, these clubs, or they go to the bars. They have
Yes.
the regulars at the bars, and these people aren't necessarily just going there to drink because you can drink
No,
out.
no, they're not. They're not. They do that at home.
They're going there for community. When somebody walks in the door and it's like Norm and Cheers, and they know your name.
Everybody knows your name. I was just gonna say that, right? I want to go to a place where everybody knows my name. That's the deal.
Yeah, we need that. And I think the church we've overlooked it because we try to kind of mirror the modern day civilization, where how the trends are going, like you said, with Amazon, DoorDash, and Uber Eats, and all those things. Push a button and it comes to me. If I need a ride, I push a button. It comes to me, and that's all good and convenient. But it is pulling away from community.
It's convenient, but when Jesus is on earth, he's focused, right? He's headed for the cross. He never lose track of that, but he's always interruptible. He's going one place and someone says, my daughter's sick. Can you come? He says, sure, let's go. The woman with the issue of blood touches him. He stops. He's walking down the street. Zacchaeus is up in the tree. Can I come over and have lunch with you? He's always purposeful in where he's going in his ministry, but always interruptible. And we are not interruptible. We are so caught up in our schedule and our comfort, which I think is a big deal, and managing our time. So interesting. I was with my oldest granddaughter. I like the Thanksgiving parade, when you see on TV. I go every year, right?
Yeah.
I've been going every year since, I don't know, my kids were little. She goes with me. And she said, oh, my friend lives down the block. I said, why don't you go see her? I can't do that. You got to call first and make a date to see your best friend. Well, my best friend used to scream at my house and knock on the door at 11 o'clock at night and say, you still awake, right? We've got to the place where everything is scheduled and timed. Mm-hmm. And then we lose the spontaneity of our of life.
Yeah.
And it's not good for us.
And then people forget how to connect with other humans. It's wild. I mean, it's what's going to happen. And a lot of churches, especially COVID, I think, increased this and increased the speed of this. When everybody was so isolated, a lot of the churches then began to use technology to broadcast their messages, which was a good thing at the time because people weren't allowed to go out and all that drama and all that nonsense. Yeah. But now people have gotten used to that. I don't have to go be a part of a church family. I can have the church family come to me and I can sit at my computer in my bathrobe with a cup of coffee and just watch praise and worship and then just watch the sermon and then click off when I'm done and I can just go about my day.
Right. Exactly.
It's good that you're getting the word and it's good that you're experiencing the presence of the Lord through that service, but you're missing out on one of the most vital parts of the body of Christ, and that is the community of the brethren. And it's not good to forsake the gathering.
Right. Like I told you earlier, we're doing this workshop tomorrow on Vacation Bible School leading to Sunday school. Well, a lot of churches do Vacation Bible School over the weekend, which is not a long time. And some of them do it online. Well, the children need to hear about Jesus. And if you do it online, they do. But the children need a hug, right? They need physical contact with other human beings, especially if they're in broken families or dysfunctional families. They need some consistency that can only happen over time, in person, touching one another and being close.
Absolutely. And we can't assume that these kids are getting that type of interaction at their home through their parents because of whatever's happening in their life. And I mean, looking back on my childhood, even though I grew up in a very godly home, my mom and dad are amazing parents and they were very loving. I remember adults that were Sunday school teachers in the church that poured into my life, that made me feel like I could be something and God loved me and that I was important. Right. And these kids in this generation need that interaction because all they get is their phones or their iPads or whatever they're on, and they're not getting that physical touch, and not, and the enemy has perverted it and all that kind of stuff. But God has called us to pour into the next generation and let them know that they are loved and they're valuable. And
Absolutely. We're social beings. We can't help it. We can't help it. And if we're honest with ourselves, but it's costly, right? So if I go to church, I got to deal with people that I don't choose who comes to church, right? God does. And so we're mixed up with all kinds of people. You
Yeah.
know, iron sharpens iron. God mixes up with people that are different than us. And he gives us the gifts of the Spirit, right? So we each come with something. But the other side of that we don't think about is we come needy, right? So I come and you need what I have. And I can share with that, and I feel good about that. But I need what you have because I'm lacking.
Yeah.
And so that's what draws us together, is the fact that we really need each other to survive. And there's a lot of sin that disrupts, and we're always dealing with asking forgiveness and all the things that go with living with other people. But we're learning to be the children of God in that context, and it only can be in that context.
Well, even if you look at Jesus's life, I mean, we're to base our lives on him and how he lived. He had community around him constantly.
And it was dependent upon them, right? Which is something I've also been thinking about. Jesus doesn't have a job. Jesus doesn't have a house. Jesus depended on people putting him up, feeding him, taking care of him. All the things that he needed as a human being, he was being ministered to by other people as he was ministering back to them in healing and deliverance and all the things he did. He made himself at the well. How does he start the conversation with the woman at the well? I'm thirsty. Can you get me something to drink? He leads with his need, not with his strength, right?
Wow.
And we need to understand that. I need to come to church because I really need to be honest and say, look, I really need these people.
Yeah. And it's okay to be vulnerable like that. It's okay to be, that's real, because we all have those needs. We all have those things in our life that we need from each other. And God puts people in our path to provide those things. We just have to be willing and open to see it and receive it.
Yes. And say that and it's okay. It's okay to be needy. All right.
Yeah.
The world says it's not okay. The world says you have to have this front. But if we acknowledge our sinfulness before God and our need for a savior, and that God knows our weaknesses anyway, and that all we really need to be, I think it was Tim Keller who talked about the fact that we got to please God. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what they think about what we look like, how we dress, and nothing else matters. Only what God thinks. And so if I get hold of that, then I don't have to worry about impressing you. I can be there in all my vulnerability because God knows. Yes. And then I'm free to receive from you. I'm not there to kind of cover up because I don't want you to think bad of me.
Yeah.
And then that's easier said than done, but I think that's where we got to get to.
I think it's interesting to think of people say, "Oh, you're needy" or whatever, but need is a position where you're open to receive.
Yes.
And the longer there's an old song that says, "The longer I serve him, the sweeter he grows," and all this. The longer I know the Lord, the more I realize how much I need him. And one of my constant prayers, just even when I'm going about my day, is, Lord, I need you. I recognize the deficiencies of my own life and realize that I need him. And then I also need those around me as well. I need people in my life that can speak truth, that can love on me, that can accept me for who I am, but challenge me to grow.
Right.
And to put myself in those accountability. That's why people need coaches and mentors.
Like this whole process that we're going through, right?
Yes.
It's because I need you guys to make this thing happen, right? You can have all the gifts and talents and all that you want, but if you don't have the people around you to make it happen, it doesn't happen. The idea that we pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps is nonsense. It's nonsense. No one does it by themselves. People say, "Oh, I did it by myself." No, you didn't. Who taught you to walk? Who taught you to use the toilet? Who taught you how to speak? Who taught you how to read? Who wrote the books that you read? Nobody does it by themselves.
Yep. We need each other. And that's okay to say that. It's okay.
It's liberating.
It is.
It's liberating because once we get past that, then we can experience one another and we can draw on each other's strengths.
Yep.
Rather than competing for one another, we can complement one another.
Yeah, it's not a competition. Life's not a competition. It's if we look at it in that respect, it really takes the pressure off. that I don't have to do it all by myself, because
That's right.
through my experience, I realized I cannot. I tried many times and I failed miserably every time, and I'm left very empty and lonely. And it's really my fault, because I was the one that excused myself from the room and
Right.
tried to do it alone.
Because I had to fill out some kind of expectation that no one had for me but myself.
Yeah, so funny. It's liberating though, and I think people that are listening to this can, and I can hear the heart of the Lord behind this. Is we need each other. I mean, in ways that we've never experienced before, especially in today's culture and climate where we're, like we talked about, so connected, but more disconnected than ever before,
Right.
which is wild to think about it. We can literally talk to anybody anywhere in the world at any time on the device that we carry around in our pocket,
Right.
which has never before in human history been available. And yet we are more disconnected and more lonely and more isolated than we've ever been before as a society.
But I think that the church is the answer to that.
Yes.
If the church gets hold of its role, and it's not just to preach the gospel, get people into heaven, which is vitally important, right?
Yeah.
But the role of the church is to, Jesus said, love God with your whole soul, heart, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself,
Mhm.
right? I always go back to the Micah passage. He's told you, oh Lord, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? Do justice, do what's right, be kind, right?
Mm.
And be humble.
Yeah.
Be kind. And people ask, what should I do? Be kind. Open
Yeah.
doors, say thank you, be
Yeah.
kind. It changes people's lives.
Say hello to the person you're passing on the street. Don't just look away. Smile and say hi.
My wife has this great story. We always go on the way to church. We stop at the McDonald's to get coffee because it's convenient, right? Don't
Yeah.
have to get out of the car.
Yeah.
But she always says thank you to the, good morning and thank you, because she drives. I can't see. I don't drive. So she's always at the window. So after doing this for a while, we get there one day, and the young girl that's at the window says, so I'm so glad you came. This is my last day, and I wanted to see you. You made my day every time you came. Why?
Wow.
I said, thank you.
Yeah.
Is it that simple? I think it is.
It's amazing. I've encouraged preachers, young preachers, and people that are on stages, um, that true ministry. When God calls you, if you're a musician and you have that gift and you share that with the world, that's a blessing, and that's not to be discounted. But one-on-one ministry is one of the greatest things that we could be a part of, and that is when, like Jesus met the woman at the well, or Zacchaeus in the tree. Those one-on-one encounters. And I remember I preached at my dad's church in Elyria, Ohio, and it was a great service. The Lord did a lot of wonderful things in the service. But after the service, everybody's congregating in the foyer, and I noticed there was a young girl, probably early 20s maybe, that was standing by the door, and no one was talking to her. So I didn't feel like this massive, word of knowledge or anything
Right.
like that, super spiritual moment. I just noticed she was by herself, and I went up and talked to her and just thanked her for coming, and asked her what her name was, and
Right.
nice to meet you, just super casual, normal stuff. Didn't think anything about it. I didn't go to that church. I just was like the guest speaker. So
Right.
the next week, that girl shows back up and comes to my mother and says, "Hey, I need to tell you something. Last week, I was in the foyer and I was going through a lot of stuff in my life at the time, and I was contemplating suicide that afternoon. But I prayed a silent prayer and asked the Lord that if somebody comes up and talks to me, then I won't do it." And because the Lord knew that, I had no idea.
Right. Oh, you were just being nice.
I was just being nice. I went over and talked to her. God used me to save her from doing something that she couldn't undo.
Right.
And that's a sobering thought. That's wild to think that that is a real thing. But how many times can in one act of kindness literally be the catalyst for God to totally revolutionize somebody's life? It's as simple as, hey, thanks for handing me that cup of coffee, could literally be the thing that changes somebody. It's like an amazing and crazy
Yeah.
thought.
We're looking for the big things, and it's
Yeah.
the little things, right? It's the
Yeah,
hi, how are you? Never saw you here before. What's your name? Is not the big missionary adventure that we want, because somehow it's exciting. It's the daily. Jesus accused of being a drunkard and a glutton, not because he was a drunkard and a glutton, but he probably went to a lot of parties, went to a lot of dinners, right?
right.
He hung out with people in those personal moments.
Yeah, Jesus was somebody you wanted at the party. You know,
Yes.
he was somebody that was fun to be around and interesting to be around, and took an interest in you when you were around him. He didn't just talk about himself all the time. He wasn't self-promoting. He asked you how you're doing, and then actually listened to what you said back.
A friend of mine said he changed the love your neighbor to like your neighbor, because love is too easy. We say we love you, but I don't like you, right? I love you, but I'm not going to be around you. He said we got to learn to like the people around us and be interested in what they're doing, which makes it completely different. And then you really love them, right? Then you're really concerned about them.
Right. Love is an aggressive thing. Like if you read, in 1 Corinthians 13, what love is, it's not just, I love you, but I love you just because I have to.
Because I have to, right? God told me to.
God told me to, and I don't want to go to hell because I didn't love you. Or whatever.
Right.
Like,
but don't come around. I don't want to talk to you.
Don't speak to me. Look the other way. And that's just some disjointed, crazy. So whoever came up with that, I love you, but I don't like you thing, probably didn't get, held as a child or something.
Right. For sure. No, it's so, the gospel ministry, I think, is simple. When we get that, because people will listen to us, right? I went through periods of knocking on doors, with very little success, right? But people listen to you when you like them and you talk to them. And then when they find themselves in need, they remember that you cared. And then they come to you. And that's when the opportunity to share the gospel with them, to really minister to them. But you got to open the door first. And the door gets opened with the hi. Never saw you here before. Saw you standing alone. Just want to say hello. Right. And then she comes back the next week and talks to your mom and says, you know what? He saved my life. Right. Mm-hmm. But from your perspective, you probably went out and said, okay, that's fine. What about your business? Didn't show up at that church the next week because you were somewhere else. So you didn't know what happened. And if my mother didn't tell you, you wouldn't have known. You still wouldn't have known what happened.
Nope. And I think Jesus summed it up, and everybody's like, wants to know what's the meaning of all of this. And they asked Jesus, and he said, all right, let me just sum it up. 2 things. Love God with all your heart,
right?
Everything that you are, your soul, your might. And then love people, love your neighbor as yourself. And that's the gospel.
Yes.
And you can't have one without the other. You can't just say you love God and not like people and not want to be around people, isolate. That is not the gospel.
You do not love God if you don't love the people God loves. And you can't love the people God loves without loving God. So it's a circular thing. And Jesus, I think it's in John 10, Jesus says, for those who will hear, love your enemy. Love those who hate you. Do good to those who seek your harm. Right. So it always goes back to love the people around you because God first loved you. Right. Yeah. When we were enemies to God, he loved us. So people say, yeah, but then I don't like, no, you didn't like God and he sent his son to die for you. Right. Then he says, come follow me.
Yep. That's when he talks about, if somebody strikes you on one cheek, give him the other one. If he asks you to go 1 mile, go 2, like go above and beyond, because you're doing it as unto the Lord. And some people say, well, there's certain situations where there's abuse and things like that. And obviously you don't put yourself in abusive situations and things of that nature. But God has called us to be kind and to be, if anything, your message, your greatest message is your smile. Yeah. And that's something so easy that all of us can do. And you can practice it in the mirror if you want to every day.
So you can. And just say hello. Just say hello. Say thank you. Just say thank you.
Right. Don't be rude. Like if you go to a restaurant, I've known some waitress friends and stuff that say the worst day in the world is Sunday afternoons because the church crowd comes out, and they're also entitled and rude and don't tip well and all that stuff.
Yes, I used to walk my wife to work. She worked 3 blocks from my house, so we'd walk to work, and there was this guy that passed us every morning at the same time. And I think and we'd always say hello. And I think if I fell on the floor, he would step over me and kept walking. He wouldn't say nothing for about 3 months. Wow. And one day he stopped. He goes, "You're not from around here, are you?" It's like, no, my family came here in the 1860s, right? No, I'm from around here. Yeah. But from that moment on, every morning, big smile on his face. Hello. No big deal. Just we passing each other on the street. Just say hello. But it took him 3 months to get past that. You're not supposed to talk to people on the street.
Wow.
Interesting, though.
It's wild. And it's so simple. And we all can do it. And it's the message of the gospel is so simple. It just takes a good theologian to help you misunderstand the Bible, you know?
Right. That's right. God so loved the world that he sent his son, right? It's all about loving the world. And God and Jesus always has one thing to everyone he talks to, the fisherman, to Matthew at the tax booth, come follow me. Mm-hmm. He just asked us to do what he did. And he was this guy that everybody liked because he liked them.
Isn't that funny too? Instead of trying to fix people, Jesus said, "Come follow me." He didn't say, "Come here, let me fix you." He said, "Come follow me."
And Peter's like the best example. Peter just never gets it, right? He never gets it. He's always the first one to make claims. "I'll never leave you."
Yeah.
Right. Who do men say to him? "You're the Christ, the Son of God, the Son of the living God." The next thing out of his mouth when Jesus says, "I'm going to suffer and die," he goes, "Not you." Tries to enter, right? Then then at the Last Supper, he's like, "Everybody's going to desert you, not me." Then he 3 times. And then even when he gets to Cornelius, Jesus has told him, right? He's already declared all food clean in another earlier portion. He knew that all the food is clean. He knew that he's been there at the resurrection where Jesus said, "You'll be my witnesses to the ends of the earth." Mm-hmm. And he can't go to Cornelius' house because his religion says, "I can't do this." And he needs a vision from God to get him to go there. And then when he gets to Galatians, he's eating ham sandwiches with everybody till the Jews come. And then he says, "No, I can't do this anymore." And Paul has to rebuke him. So if anybody demonstrates to us the longevity of our lessons, it's the Apostle Peter, right? We got to go through, we got to stumble and fall, but we got to get back up and get this right. We are called to love our neighbors as we love ourselves.
And it's funny, like we'll never arrive either. We're always learning and always growing.
Something's going to get in the way. That's my new book that I'm dealing with. Something always gets in the way from us obeying Jesus. And it usually has to do with us being uncomfortable. Yeah. Jesus says, let's go to he has to leave Galilee and go up or leave Jerusalem, go up to Galilee. They walk the Roman road. They rather walk through the Gentile land than walk through the Samaritan land. Jesus goes, "We're leaving. We're going through Samaria." They had to be like at wit's end. What do you mean we don't walk through Samaria? Right. And then he stops at the well, and it's like this whole thing. It's like, and they're just uncomfortable for no reason at all. They're just uncomfortable. Yeah. Peter's uncomfortable. The Gentiles come in. They're uncomfortable with these new people coming into the church. But our uncomfortableness prevents us from walking in faith and trusting God. Yeah. And the joy comes in serving God. So if we don't get over our feeling uncomfortable, then we can't be effective for the gospel.
I feel like growth only happens when we're uncomfortable. That's why I tell people all the time that and I've always been like this, I love awkward situations. Yeah. They're my most favorite thing in the whole world because it forces me to do something I've never done before and to react in ways I've never had to react before because it's out of my comfort zone. But that's where you discover growth. And then you realize that wasn't so bad after all. And then you don't regret it. You feel thankful that you did it.
Oh, absolutely. Probably the most scary thing I've done recently is write a book. There's nothing scarier than writing a book and throwing it out there. Because once you do it, it's out there. And you don't know what's going to happen. Right. but you've got to go through that uncomfortableness to say that it opens up doors of ministry that you wouldn't have before. And you could say, yeah, I'd like to do this, but I'm afraid. Well, then it ends right there. The moment you say I'm uncomfortable or I'm afraid, everything comes to a halt.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can't go forward.
Yep. Obey. Yeah. Find the areas that you're the most uncomfortable about and just like run toward them.
Run towards them. That's right. Run towards them.
David wasn't very comfortable having to go fight the lion or the bear. Sure wasn't very comfortable while everybody was hiding behind the rocks and being intimidated by this massive man called Goliath. That wasn't very, comfortable feeling. It wasn't just, I'm going to go charge at this guy and that's going to be the easiest thing I do all day.
Yeah, nothing makes sense, right? They give him Saul gives him a helmet and a sword, and he can barely lift it up. No, this is not. I'm going to go with my slingshot.
Yeah, I can't move with this. Yeah.
And I'm going to trust God, right? Yeah. And nobody's saying this is okay. Everybody's like looking on, going, "This man's crazy."
It's the simple things like that just really unlock the blessing of the Lord on our lives and really opens the door for people to receive the love of God. And not only it's good for them, but like when I heard that story of that girl in the foyer, I know that it blessed her, but it did something in me, and I'll never forget it. It's one of those moments that I didn't really know happened at the time, but now that I know, I'll never forget it, and it almost brings me to tears every time I think about it. So when we obey God in those moments, it does more for us than
the joy of the Lord comes. The joy of the Lord overcomes you, right? You got to get past the being uncomfortable to experience the joy of the Lord. Otherwise, you're just stuck. Mm. You would have just stood on the corner. You would have talked to all the people you know anyway. And this woman would have stood in the corner, and who knows what she would have done if she left the church, right? Yeah. But you don't get told that. That's the interesting thing. We want tangible results that we can check, right? Yeah. But you got one to encourage you to do it all the time, right? Yep. So that story will get you to anytime you see somebody, you'll remember that story. But most of the time, we don't get the result. The people that witnessed the gospel to me in Clearwater Beach, Florida, don't know anything about me, and I don't know anything about them. They went back to Michigan. I went back to New York. I wouldn't know them if I stumbled upon them. And they probably don't even remember that they did what they did and the conversation they had with me. Probably not. But if they weren't there, I wouldn't have heard the gospel.
Wow. Obedience in moments and just looking for opportunities to be kind. You never know what God can do with that.
Never know what's going to happen. Being kind. I've told you, old man, what is good. What does the Lord require of you? Do justice, be kind, and be humble. Very simple.
Yep. And if people feel like, well, it's hard for me because I'm going through so much right now. I've got so much trouble and drama, and I've got situations in my life that are overwhelming. I need people to be kind to me. Well, we all have stuff, and we all can sit around and cry on each other's shoulders and talk about nobody knows our sorrows. Nobody knows the trouble we've seen. But if we look past ourselves and begin to pour into other people, just like we talked about a second ago, guess what? Our needs get met too.
They do.
There's enough at the table to feed everybody. And that's how we receive, is by giving. I mean, we preach it all the time. If you want to receive, you got to give. You got to sow a seed if you want to harvest.
That's right. Blessed are the merciful, because they'll receive mercy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, Jesus was clear. He told us, right? Be merciful and you will receive mercy. Be kind, they will be kind to you.
It's sowing towards the area that we need. It's like if a farmer needs corn, he has to plant corn.
Right. That's right. It seems so simple, right?
You need encouragement. Go encourage somebody else. If you need joy, go cause joy in somebody else's life.
That's right. Just be Jesus to the people around you, right? Be interruptible. Be attentive to the people around you.
Yeah.
Do what you can, and then go on and just enjoy the experience of being with other people, because that's how we were made. That's what we were made to be.
and get involved in community. I think
Yeah,
that's
well, yeah,
of this whole conversation. I love it because we need each other. We need each other. We need the Lord, and He's never leaving us or forsaking us. He's always here, but He put us around each other for a reason.
for a reason, right? He made Adam and he said it was very good. And then he said, wait a minute,
Absolutely.
it's not good for Adam to be alone. And it's not just a marriage thing. It's a social thing. We're creating the image of God, who's a triune God. God is a community unto himself, right?
Yeah.
Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We cannot be by ourselves. And he brings all the animals before him, right?
Yeah.
And he names them, and it says, but none of them satisfied him until bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, right?
Yeah.
You can say you love your dog, but your dog's not your neighbor or your wife or your child or anyone else. I love my dog, but he don't satisfy me like other human beings.
No, I tell if you're friends with me for any long length of time, you've probably heard me say this, but there are over 8 billion people on planet Earth right now, and God, in His wisdom, no matter how you think of it, decided that you and I should know each other.
Right.
And I think that that's something special, and that's something that to be discovered. Right? We need to learn, how am I to pour into you, and what am I to receive from you? Just like
That's
this.
right.
There's no accidents in the kingdom of God. Whether you like it or not, you're around the people that God's called you to be around, and it's us to discover the why.
That's right. Billy Graham said that we're together by divine appointment, right? God has gathered us together in the church that we're in.
Yeah.
And we're not all the same, because it wouldn't work. If we're all the same, it wouldn't work.
Yeah, especially if you're in a church right now, and I feel like there's somebody listening that's discontented and they feel like they're not being served in that church. Instead of asking yourself, why won't they serve me? Why don't you ask, how can I serve them, and see how everything changes?
Yes, because you have. I have a story. A friend of mine, he's with the Lord. He's a good Christian. But when we were in the church, and the church was kind of, my first church was working class and poor people, and he's pretty talented. Did really well with himself. Very gifted. When we had a work day, he would organize it. I mean, everything was in place. It was organized, right? When everybody else organizes, like, where's the shovels? Blah, blah, blah. But he said to me, I can't stay here. There's nobody like me. But the point is, that's why you're here. Because if there was other people like you, wouldn't need you, right? You're needed because there is no one else like you.
Amen. Yeah, absolutely. Wow. So good. So good.
Amen.
I appreciate you, brother. Well,
this is fun. I always like talking to you. It's fun. This is good stuff.
We'll be doing lots of these, and
that's good, man.
This will be on your brand new YouTube channel, so that's exciting.
Amen.
And we're going to be doing a lot of fun stuff with that. Just encourage everybody to share this conversation. I really believe it's going to be a blessing to a lot of people. I think the Lord's going to use it to help people, which is what we talked about. I mean, that's it.
Now, I'm very excited about what God seems to be opening up to you guys, and through the book and all this stuff. It seems to be like, I'm to the end of my ministry, right? So I'm kind of like looking to see what I leave behind. How do I share all the things that I've been through? Kind of like your father's probably in the same place, right? You get to a point where you do all this stuff, and now what do you do with all the things you learned, and how do you share it with the people around you?
Yeah, and just because, what I've encouraged him and some other people and people that are listening to this, remember the things that God has done in your life over the years. And we look at something that happened 30 years ago as old, but the Lord doesn't look at time like we do. He's eternal. So it's not old, it's still relevant. And that's why in the Old Testament, they would put the landmarks, and they would build altars.
Right.
They would build a memorial to the Lord, because they wanted to remember what the Lord had done.
Right.
And so it's very important that we remember, and then we share that with the generation that is around us now, because they need to hear the wonders of the Lord that have happened in our life, and the things that God has done in our life, because it's going to encourage them.
Yeah, because it's not really different, right? It's just different circumstances, different people, same struggles.
We're all unique, but we're all really alike.
That's right.
So,
that's right.
Awesome.
Amen.
Thank you for taking time today, and we'll do this again.
All right. I'll look at your email and get that stuff to you. And
I appreciate it, my friend.
all right, man. God bless you, brother. Talk to you.